All right, let's dive right in, shall we? We're all about unlocking that power of audience and writing, and we've got your notes here on week 3 reading on audience. Looks like you've got a good mix of perspectives in here.
It is a really interesting mix, and you're definitely like digging deep into how understanding audience can really, well, elevate your writing.
It's so key because it's like you can have the most amazing ideas in the world, but if they're not landing, what's the point? You know, you've even got stuff here about writing for like instructors, your classmates. There's even a bit comparing online communities to being in a tribal society.
Yeah, it sounds a little out there when you put it like that, but the heart of it is that all these different sources are saying the same thing. You got to know your audience. It's almost anthropological,
Yeah,
like it's not just about the information. It's about understanding the culture of the person reading your work.
I love that. And you highlighted a section here on like identifying audiences. And that
Yeah.
really resonates with me because it's like when I'm prepping for a big presentation, right? My whole approach changes based on who's going to be in the room.
Exactly. You've got to tailor your style, your tone, even your word choice is different. Like imagine trying to explain, say, ethanol. You're not going to talk to a bunch of first graders the way you would if you were talking to other scientists.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And speaking of which, there's this note here about how, like, assuming your instructor knows everything can really backfire. Just kind of skipping over something you think they'll know.
It's such an easy trap to fall into. And the source actually gives this great advice, kind of a mind shift, right, for your instructor. Yeah, but imagine them as like intelligent, but totally uninformed about that specific thing.
That's actually super helpful. So, okay, we know we need to think about our audience, but how do we figure out what they actually need from our writing? You've got all these great questions here.
I think it comes down to empathy, honestly. Really putting yourself in their shoes, thinking about, like, what are their expectations when they pick up your paper or your article? What are they hoping to get out of it?
It's about understanding their motivations.
Exactly. And there's even that question of, what do you want them to assume about you as the writer?
Hmm.
Which is interesting, right? Because it gets into this idea of building credibility.
Oh, totally. It's like you're crafting a persona. And that actually ties into this other big thing you've highlighted. How much do you explain something? Because, too much and you're going to bore people, but too little. And it's like, wait, how did we get here?
Right. And the source uses that great analogy. It's like, are you showing them the forest or just a bunch of trees?
Yes. And you've definitely grasped that from the reading. It's about that balance of detail and analysis.
Give them just enough to get the bigger picture,
Yeah.
to follow your argument without overwhelming them.
It's like guiding them through your thought process, right? And I do love this practical advice you have highlighted. Read your draft out loud. Have someone else read it.
It's amazing how many people skip those steps.
Right, and it makes such a difference. Like you wouldn't send a cake out into the world without tasting it first.
And it gets at this bigger idea that's woven through all of these sources, this emphasis on feedback and revision. You've even got notes here on using AI, like ChatGPT, to help refine your writing, which I think is so interesting.
Right, it's like the tools are changing so fast. But even with all that, it really comes down to understanding that there's another human being on the other side of your words.
It really is amazing to see how technology is changing the way we write. And speaking of technology, you have a whole section here in your notes about online communities and how they relate to audience.
Yeah. There's that whole comparison to like tribal societies, which I'll admit at first I was like, okay. But the more I think about it,
It really makes you think about how even though, like, the internet is this whole new thing, we're still drawn to the same patterns of communication that we've always had. Like, you have this quote highlighted, orality is the base of all human experience.
that's true. Like, even if writing is like a relatively recent invention, we still crave that back and forth.
Exactly. It's like we're all just gathering around the digital campfire.
Totally. And it's interesting. You have this note about how even those online friendships are kind of like exchanging gifts. It's not just about like how many followers you have. It's about finding your people.
It's building social capital,
Yeah.
even in the digital world.
Right. But then that brings up that question you had. Does all of this online interaction, this secondary orality, like you call it, does that actually change how we connect offline?
It's something to think about, for sure. And it makes me think about how the internet can sometimes flatten those social hierarchies we see offline.
Oh, yeah. Like suddenly everyone's on a first name basis, even if they're like a CEO or something.
Right. And that's something to remember about audience, too. You're always writing within a very specific context. You wouldn't engage with, say, a comment section on a news article the same way you would participate in an academic forum, even if you're talking about the same topic, right?
Totally. It's like different worlds with different rules.
It is. And just like in a face-to-face conversation, you change your approach depending on who you're talking to.
So it's not just about what you say online, but how you say it and who you're saying it to.
Exactly. And that awareness of audience, it's a skill that translates to all kinds of writing, whether it's an email to your boss, a social media post, or even a research paper. Speaking of which, there's another key takeaway from your notes about audience. Knowing how much to explain without overwhelming or underestimating your reader.
It's about walking that line, right? Like, you don't want to give them too much, but you don't want to leave them hanging either.
Exactly. And it's not just about how much you tell them, it's also about the actual words you use. Like you have that example in your notes about how you'd explain something complex to a friend versus how you'd write about it in, say, a research paper.
Oh, totally. It's way different. Like, I might tell my friend, ah, that movie was so boring. But if I was writing a paper, I'd probably say something like, the theme's pacing lacked dynamism or whatever.
Exactly. It's all about choosing the right words for the job, right? And it makes me think about another one of your big takeaways from the reading. That question, what do you want your audience to assume about you? That's such a powerful idea.
It really is, because it's almost like every time we write something, we're putting on a bit of a performance, aren't we? We're trying to create a certain persona.
Totally. Like, are you the friendly expert, the witty observer, the serious scholar? It all comes through in how you write.
And that goes back to understanding what your audience is expecting, right?
Exactly. It's kind of like, choosing what to wear for a job interview. You want to make the right impression?
It's so true. It's like different contexts, different rules. But even with all that, I think one thing that always stays the same is that, desire to connect. Like at the heart of it, we want to share our ideas and our perspectives, right?
Absolutely. And that's what makes writing so amazing, right? When you really understand your audience, when you take the time to craft your message, you can create something really powerful.
Something that really resonates. So as you're working on your writing, keep that in mind. It's a conversation. It's an opportunity to connect with someone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So keep exploring, keep experimenting, and never, ever underestimate the power of your words.
And that, my friend, is a wrap on another deep dive.